Before we begin, a quick update. We're now on Spotify. Just search for Sherlock Holmes Sleep Stories on Spotify and you'll find us. From now on, we'll be posting new episodes there every single day, and we won't be uploading here anymore. The link is also in the description. See you on Spotify.
Welcome to What If Sleepstorian, soft-spoken tales to slow the day's thoughts and carry you toward peaceful sleep. Before we begin, tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight, and, if you wish, what's on your mind. I read every note and love keeping quiet company across distances. If this brings you peace, a like and subscribe help me make more nightbound stories. And if you'd like to support even further, you can buy me a coffee through the link in the description. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and breathe with me as we begin. The cold finds you first through your fingertips, then your nose. That particular December cold of London in 1889, the kind that makes the air taste of cold smoke and coming snow. Victoria Station stands enormous and echoing in the early evening darkness, its great iron and glass roof arching overhead like the ribcage of some impossible whale, trapping the sounds of 100 hurried journeys and amplifying them into a symphony of departure. Steam hisses from the waiting engines in white plumes that curl upward and disappear into the gloom above, and the gaslights along the platforms flicker with a warmth that seems almost apologetic against the creeping chill. It is the 20th of December, and England is preparing to settle into the quiet drowse of Christmas week. But here, in this cathedral of iron and ambition, there is no quiet yet. Only the last great rush of travellers fleeing London for family estates in the north, for Scottish relatives and country manors, for anywhere that promises a hearth fire and the temporary forgetting of the city's relentless churn. Platform 7 hosts the Northern Express, a sleek line of first-class carriages bound for Edinburgh, and the crowd pressed along its length carries the particular tension of the well-to-do engaged in the undignified scramble of departure. Porters in their deep burgundy uniforms navigate the chaos with the practiced grace of sailors in familiar storms, their trolleys piled high with leather cases and hat boxes and mysterious parcels wrapped in brown paper and string. A vendor calls out from his brazier, selling roasted chestnuts that perfume the air with a sweetness almost strong enough to mask the sharper sense of oil and metal and human proximity. The train itself gleams with recent polishing, its navy blue paint catching the gaslight in long, elegant curves. The windows glow amber from within, promising warmth and comfort, though comfort in Victorian England is always a negotiable thing, its quality dependent entirely upon the price of one's ticket and the accident of one's berth. Among the crowd, moving with the unhurried precision of a man who knows exactly where he is going and expects the world to accommodate him, is someone who appears to be a minor civil servant of indeterminate importance. He wears a modest greatcoat of charcoal wool, a bowler hat that has seen better seasons, and carries only a single leather, travelling case of unremarkable quality. His face, partially obscured by a woolen scarf, suggests middle age and middle management. The sort of man one might pass a dozen times in Whitehall without ever quite seeing. But if you watched his eyes, you might notice something the hurrying crowds miss. They move constantly, cataloguing, measuring, noting the placement of every porter and the contents of every trunk, observing the way the widow in black velvet keeps one hand always on her reticule, how the stout reverend's cheerfulness seems just a fraction too insistent, the manner in which the nervous gentleman in the expensive coat checks his pocket watch every 30 seconds, as if time itself might betray him. These are not the eyes of a civil servant. These are the eyes of Sherlock Holmes. Behind him, at a carefully calculated distance of 3 paces, walks Dr. John Watson, who has abandoned all pretense of disguise and simply looks like himself. A solid, dependable English gentleman with a military bearing he will carry to his grave, a medical bag in one hand and an expression of patient resignation that suggests he has long since accepted that his holidays will never be entirely his own. "I still don't understand," Watson murmurs as they approach their carriage, keeping his voice low. "Why we couldn't simply travel as ourselves. Surely even criminals take Christmas week off for good behaviour. Holmes, or rather the civil servant who is absolutely not Holmes, adjusts his scarf with fingers that seem just slightly too elegant for his costume. Crime Watson is depressingly unaware of the liturgical calendar and I have received 3 telegrams in as many days suggesting that certain parties would find my absence from London during the holidays to be convenient. Convenient for whom? Precisely the question I prefer they continue asking themselves while I'm elsewhere, observing them fail to locate me. Holmes pauses at the door to their compartment, glancing back down the platform. Besides, there is something rather soothing about anonymity. To be invisible is to see clearly. This is debatable philosophy, but Watson has learned to choose his battles. They board the train, entering a corridor panelled in warm mahogany and floored with carpet the colour of claret wine. The first-class carriages of the Northern Express are designed to make passengers forget they are hurtling through space in a metal box. Each private compartment features cushioned benches that convert to sleeping berths, small tables that fold from the walls, and reading lamps with frosted glass shades that cast a gentle, bookish light. Their compartment sits midway down the carriage, offering a view of the platform that Holmes studies with apparent casualness while Watson settles their bags. But in his peripheral vision, Holmes is tracking the other passengers filtering into the neighbouring compartments, building a mental map of their Christmas Eve voyage. Directly, across the corridor, a woman of perhaps 40 dressed in the elegant blacks and greys of extended mourning, her travelling costume clearly expensive, her posture suggesting both grief and steel. She moves with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing her own affairs, dismissing the porter with a precise tip and a nod that permits no conversation. Mrs. Ashford, according to the passenger manifest, Holmes absolutely should not have glimpsed while the conductor was distracted. 2 compartments down, a clergyman of the hearty, jovial variety, all rosy cheeks and beneficent smiles, shaking hands with everyone nearby as if preparing to bless the entire journey. Reverend Pemberton, off to visit his sister's family in Newcastle, spreading Christmas cheer with the enthusiasm of a man who has made it his profession. His laugh carries down the corridor, a booming, practice sound that makes Watson smile, and Holmes's eye twitch almost imperceptibly. And beside him, a young woman travelling alone, or rather, travelling with a formidable collection of books and papers that she guards more carefully than most women guard their jewellery. She's perhaps 25, dressed in the practical dark blue of the professional woman, her hair pinned with more attention to security than fashion. She catches Holmes looking and meets his gaze with the direct assessment of someone unaccustomed to apologising for her presence in spaces designed for men. Miss Hartley, Holmes thinks, and makes a mental note of the press credentials just visible in her document case. But it is the man in the corner compartment who draws Holmes's most sustained attention. Cornelius Blackwood is what the newspapers call a captain of industry, which is a polite way of saying he has made an enormous fortune doing things the old aristocracy finds vaguely distasteful but cannot quite condemn given their own reliance on the dividends. He's perhaps 55, built like a bull that has been stuffed into Savile Row tailoring, with the kind of florid complexion that suggests either excellent health or incipient apoplexy. The Victorians, in their wisdom, have not yet determined which. His watch chain is gold and thick enough to moor a small boat, and he wears prosperity the way other men wear cologne, liberally and without subtlety. He is also, quite clearly, terrified. It shows in the way he checks the corridor before entering his compartment, in the manner he instructs his valet, a thin, nervous man named Jenkins who hovers like an anxious shadow, to test the lock 3 times before he's satisfied. It shows in how his eyes dart to the window, to the door, to the other passengers, as if calculating distances and escape routes. Blackwood carries his fear like a man carrying nitroglycerin, aware that one wrong step might detonate everything. Holmes watches him disappear into his compartment and pull the curtain firmly across the glass, and something in the detective's expression sharpens. "Holmes," Watson says quietly, recognising that particular quality of attention. "We are on holiday, of course, which means rest, relaxation, and a deliberate absence of criminal intrigue. Naturally. So whatever you're thinking about that man, I am thinking," Holmes interrupts mildly, "that his compartment has an excellent lock and that he seems extraordinarily invested in its efficacy. Merely an observation, Watson. Surely I am allowed observations, even on holiday." Watson sighs the sigh of a man who knows he has already lost this argument. Probably lost it the moment they decided to take this train. Possibly lost it years ago when he first agreed to share lodgings with a consulting detective. He removes his coat and settles onto the cushioned bench, watching through the window as the last passengers board and the platform begins to empty of all but the porters and the inevitable stragglers who will miss their trains and spend Christmas in London after all. The station clock shows 7:30. Somewhere down the platform a whistle blows, sharp and authoritative, the sound of departure given voice. The Northern Express shudders, pauses, and then begins to move with the slow inevitability of great things in motion. The platform slides past, gaining speed, and then the station itself falls away behind them, and they are out into the London night, into the maze of tracks and signals that guide the trains through the city's southern reaches. Gaslight gives way to darkness, broken by scattered windows, and then to the deeper darkness of the open country beyond. Inside the carriage, the lamps burn steady and warm. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on track settles into a lullaby percussion that will accompany them through the night. That particular sound that belongs only to trains, the sound of distance being consumed, of destinations approaching 1 mile at a time. Holmes removes his disguise piece by piece, the scarf, the coat, the bowler hat, revealing himself by degrees. He produces his pipe from an inner pocket but does not light it, merely holds it in the way some men hold prayer beads, a focus for thought. Watson knows this mood, the quiet before the problem, the hunter's patience before the quarry reveals itself. "Tell me about Blackwood," Watson says, because if Holmes is going to obsess, he might as well obsess aloud where Watson can monitor the process. Holmes's smile is brief and genuine. "You noticed him too, then?" "I noticed you noticing him, which amounts to the same thing. Who is he?" "Cornelius Blackwood. Mining investments, primarily. Bought cheap stakes in Welsh coal operations during the labour troubles of '87, then sold them to larger concerns at considerable profit when the strikes ended. Invested those profits in African diamond exploration, which is either visionary or insane, depending on whom you ask. The financial papers lionize him as a man of bold intuition. The Labour papers call him something substantially less flattering. And he's afraid. Deeply. Did you notice his hands? Tremor in the fingers, ink stains suggesting recent hasty correspondence. The valley is new. They lack the comfortable synchronization of long association. And that lock he tested so obsessively is a Bremer, one of the finest mechanisms available. A man does not install a Bremer lock on a train compartment door unless he believes something valuable requires protection. His life, Watson suggests. Possibly. Or his secrets, which for some men amount to the same thing. Holmes sets down his pipe and leans back, closing his eyes. "But you're right, Watson. We're on holiday. Let us leave Mr. Blackwood to his fears and his excellent lock. Tomorrow we will be in Edinburgh, and you may drag me to as many respectable dinner parties as your social conscience demands." Watson permits himself a small smile. Holmes, at dinner parties, is a spectacle unto himself. Charming when the mood strikes him, impossible when it doesn't, and always, always watching. "I'll hold you to that promise." The train gathers speed as they leave London's orbit, plunging into the Hertfordshire countryside where villages cluster around church spires and lights glow warm in cottage windows. Snow begins to fall, just a few flakes at first, tentative explorers testing the air, then more steadily, until the darkness outside the window becomes a swirling canvas of white and black. Somewhere in the compartment down the corridor, Cornelius Blackwood sits alone in the amber lamplight, staring at the locked door that separates him from the world and from whatever he believes is coming for him. The train rushes north into the winter night, carrying its cargo of strangers and secrets, of Christmas journeys and hidden fears, of everything that people pack into their travelling cases and everything they cannot leave behind. And the snow falls and falls and falls, as if the sky itself has decided that this particular journey requires a softer kind of darkness, a gentler forgetting. But the snow, as the passengers will learn by morning, is not gentle at all. It is merely patient. The English countryside unfolds in the darkness like a story told in whispers. Here a farmhouse with golden windows. There are copse of bare trees standing skeletal against the sky. Everywhere the gentle undulation of land that has been shaped by centuries of patient cultivation. The snow thickens as the Northern Express pushes deeper into the night, each flake catching the light from the carriage windows before vanishing into the blur of speed and darkness. Inside, the train has settled into its travelling rhythm, that peculiar atmosphere that belongs only to long journeys by rail, a sense of suspension between departure and arrival, of existing temporarily outside the normal flow of time. The first-class carriage hums with muted conversation and the small domestic sounds of passengers arranging themselves for the night ahead. Someone is brewing tea in their compartment. The scent of bergamot drifts down the corridor. The heating pipes tick and murmur, fighting their endless battle against the December cold that presses against the windows like an uninvited guest. Holmes has abandoned his pretense of rest and sits by the window, watching the snow with the focused attention he normally reserves for footprints and cigar ash. Watson, who has seen this mood before, contents himself with a medical journal, though his eyes keep straying to his companion's profile, noting the slight furrow between the brows that suggests wheels turning, patterns emerging, the great machinery of deduction beginning to warm itself for work. "It's getting worse," Watson observes, nodding toward the window where the snow now falls so thickly that the landscape has become an abstraction, all detail lost to the white. Indeed, we're approaching the high country, Northumberland probably, given the time and our speed. The elevation makes the weather unpredictable. Holmes taps one long finger against the glass. The temperature is dropping rapidly. See how the snow is beginning to stick to the window edges? In another hour, visibility will be nearly zero. Should we be concerned? The engineers know these routes intimately. They'll slow if necessary, stop if they must, though I confess I'd prefer to reach Edinburgh before Christmas Eve becomes Christmas morning. Your Scottish relatives strike me as the type to take punctuality seriously. Watson smiles. They take everything seriously. It's the Presbyterian influence. My Aunt Margaret once gave me a 3/4-hour lecture on the moral implications of wearing brown shoes with a black suit. Devastating. I've never quite recovered. Their conversation is interrupted by movement in the corridor, the conductor making his rounds, checking tickets and announcing dinner service in the dining car. He is a man of perhaps 50, with the weathered competence of someone who has spent decades managing the small mobile civilization of a first-class carriage. His uniform is immaculate despite the long hours, and he moves with the rolling gait of someone accustomed to maintaining balance on a moving platform. "Dinner is being served, gentlemen," he announces, touching his cap. "Though I should warn you the weather may make for a somewhat adventurous dining experience. We're encountering heavier snow than expected." "How much heavier?" Holmes asks, his tone casual but his attention sharp. The conductor glances toward the window and something in his expression shifts, a momentary crack in the professional facade. "Enough that I've sent word to the engineer to reduce speed. We've reports of drifting on the tracks further north. Nothing to alarm the passengers about, you understand, but, well, best to be cautious." After he departs, Watson and Holmes exchange a look. "So much for uneventful," Watson murmurs. The dining car sits at the centre of the train, accessible through a swaying passage that connects the carriages. A brief journey through the roar of wind and wheels before emerging into warmth and the gentle clink of silver on china. The car has been decorated for the season with modest festivity. Garlands of evergreen along the windows, red ribbon tied in careful bows, candles in glass shields that cast dancing shadows across the white tablecloths. Perhaps a dozen passengers have ventured out for dinner, scattered among the small tables that line both sides of the car. The menu is printed on heavy cardstock in elaborate script. Consommé, roasted fowl, winter vegetables, a choice of puddings. It is the kind of meal designed to reassure passengers that civilization persists even at 70 miles per hour through a snowstorm, that one can still observe the proprieties, still maintain standards, still pretend that dinner on a train is fundamentally no different from dinner in one's own dining room. Holmes and Watson take a table near the centre, positioning themselves with a clear view of the other diners. It is, Watson thinks, impossible for Holmes to simply eat dinner like a normal person. He must always observe, catalogue, deduce, as if every meal is a puzzle waiting to be solved. And perhaps, Watson admits privately, every meal is. Cornelius Blackwood sits alone at a corner table, his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. He has ordered but barely touches his food, instead nursing a brandy that he holds with both hands as if drawing warmth from the glass. His earlier fear has crystallized into something harder, more brittle, the expression of a man who has made his calculations and doesn't like the sum. Every time someone enters the dining car, his shoulders tense infinitesimally before he forces them to relax. 2 tables away, Mrs. Ashford dines with the elegant efficiency of a woman who has long since ceased to care what others think of her solitary state. She has brought a book, a scandalous choice for the dining car, but she reads between courses with complete absorption, occasionally making notes in the margins with a small silver pencil. The book, Watson notices, appears to be a treatise on mineralogy, an unusual choice for leisure reading. Reverend Pemberton holds court at the largest table, having gathered a small congregation of fellow travellers through sheer force of bonhomie. His laughter punctuates the car's ambient conversation, loud and frequent, and he seems determined to ensure everyone within earshot knows that he's having a splendid time. Between jokes, however, his eyes drift toward Blackwood's table, with an attention that seems less casual than he intends. Miss Hartley eats quickly, mechanically, her focus on a notebook spread beside her plate. She writes in shorthand. Watson recognises the symbols from his own medical training, filling page after page with observations that occasionally make her pause and glance around the car as if confirming details. When her gaze meets Blackwood's for a fraction of a second, something passes between them, recognition perhaps, or wariness. Then both look away, the moment broken. Quite the collection of characters, Watson murmurs, cutting into his roasted fowl. Holmes sips his wine, his expression thoughtful. Indeed, though I wonder which ones are characters and which are merely players in someone else's drama. You think there's a connection between these particular passengers? I think, Holmes says slowly, that Cornelius Blackwood is not the only person on this train who appears to be waiting for something to happen. Mrs. Ashford reads about mineralogy, while studiously ignoring the mining magnate 3 tables away, yet her book is positioned so she can see him in her peripheral vision. The jovial Reverend makes a great show of his Christmas cheer, while watching Blackwood like a cat watches a mouse hole, and Miss Hartley, he pauses, watching as the young woman closes her notebook and tucks it into her bag. Miss Hartley writes as if she's already composing the article, which suggests she knows what the story will be before it happens. Or she's simply a thorough journalist. Possibly. But tell me, Watson, if you were a mining magnate with enemies, would you choose to travel during the Christmas week when trains are crowded and stations are chaos? Or would you wait until the new year when surveillance might be easier to detect? Watson considers this. I suppose the crowds provide cover, harder to single out a threat when surrounded by hundreds of travellers. Precisely, unless, of course, the threat is not external but internal, not waiting in the stations but already on the train. Before Watson can respond, the dining car lurches violently to one side. Glasses slide across tables, and Mrs. Ashford's book tumbles to the floor. The candles flutter in their shields, and for a moment the warm civilized space transforms into something more precarious. A metal box balanced on rails, subject to the whims of weather and physics. The train steadies, but slower now, the rhythm of the wheels changing to a more laboured cadence. Through the windows the snow swirls so thickly that it seems solid, as if they are not travelling through weather but through some white substance that has replaced the air itself. The conductor appears in the doorway, his earlier composure now definitely strained. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're experiencing heavier snow conditions than anticipated and will be reducing speed as a precautionary measure. There is no cause for alarm. Another lurch, this one accompanied by a grinding shriek of brakes engaging. The conductor grabs the doorframe for balance and several passengers gasp. Blackwood's brandy glass shatters against his table, spreading amber liquid across the white cloth like a stain on fresh snow. Then, with a final shudder that seems to travel the entire length of the train like a sigh, the Northern Express comes to a complete stop. The silence is profound. After hours of constant motion, constant noise, the absence feels almost physical, as if something essential has been removed from the world and they are all waiting to discover what will fill the vacuum. The conductor straightens his uniform with shaking hands. I'll go forward and consult with the engineer. Please remain in your compartments. He vanishes into the forward passage, and conversation erupts among the passengers, some anxious, some excited in the way people become when routine is disrupted, and disaster remains theoretical. But Holmes is already moving, rising from the table with Watson following automatically, drawn by years of partnership into the wake of the detective's purpose. They make their way back to their compartment through corridors that now feel stationary and strange, no longer part of a journey but simply rooms arranged in a line. Through the windows, the snow continues its assault, and Watson can see nothing beyond the glass but white upon white upon white. In their compartment, Holmes immediately goes to the window, pressing close to see out. "We're in open country," he reports. "No lights visible anywhere, no villages, no farms, just moorland and snow." "How long do you think we'll be stopped?" "That depends entirely on what's ahead. If it's simply snow on the tracks, they may be able to clear it and continue. If it's drifts—" He doesn't finish the sentence, but Watson understands. Drifts on open moorland, driven by wind, can pile higher than a man in minutes. The train could be trapped for hours, days even. The conductor returns 20 minutes later, moving from compartment to compartment, with news that manages to be both reassuring and deeply concerning. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Northern Express has encountered significant snow accumulation on the tracks ahead. For your safety, we've stopped while we assess the situation. The railway company has been telegraphed. We passed a signal station about 2 miles back, and assistance is being arranged. In the meantime, we have adequate coal for heating, provisions for breakfast, and the crew is experienced in such matters. I expect we'll be moving again by morning at the latest." "By morning?" someone down the corridor protests. "We'll miss our connections." "The railway will make every accommodation for delayed passengers, sir. For now, I must ask everyone to remain in their compartments. The heating will continue through the night, and we'll provide updates as we have them." He departs before anyone can ask more questions, which Watson suspects is deliberate. Questions lead to panic, and panic in a confined space is more dangerous than any snowstorm. The next few hours pass in a strange suspension of normal time. The train sits dark and isolated in a landscape that might as well be the Arctic for all they can see of it. Some passengers settle into sleep. Others remain wakeful, reading by lamplight or simply staring out at the relentless snow. The heating struggles against the cold that seeps in through every gap and seal, and gradually the compartments cool from comfortable to merely adequate to something that requires extra blankets and will require more by morning. Around midnight, Holmes abandons any pretense of rest and produces a small notebook from his travelling case. He sketches the layout of the carriage with quick, precise strokes, each compartment marked, each passenger noted, distances measured. Watson watches this process with familiar resignation. "You're mapping it," he observes, "merely organising my thoughts. You're preparing for something." Holmes looks up, and in the lamplight his eyes are very bright. "I am preparing, Watson, for what happens when people are trapped together in close quarters, with their secrets and their fears and no escape. Humans are social creatures, but we require space to maintain our civilized veneers. Remove that space, add pressure, and interesting things emerge." "You think something will happen?" "I think," Holmes says carefully, "that Cornelius Blackwood is a man who believes something will happen, and men who believe that tend to be proven right, either through genuine danger or through self-fulfilling prophecy. And if something does occur on a snowbound train in the middle of nowhere—" He returns to his sketch, adding small details Watson can't quite see. "Well, it will be in contained environment, every clue preserved, every witness accounted for, every variable known." "You're enjoying this," Watson accuses, though without real heat. Holmes's smile is brief and genuine. "I am enjoying the intellectual exercise of anticipation. Whether I enjoy the reality will depend entirely on what reality provides." Around 1 in the morning, Watson finally succumbs to sleep, lulled by the strange stillness and the gentle hiss of the heating pipes. His last conscious observation is of Holmes still sitting by the window, still watching, still waiting for the problem to reveal itself. And down the corridor, in his locked compartment, Cornelius Blackwood dismisses his valet for the night, tests the lock one final time, and draws the curtain across his door with the air of a man preparing for siege. The snow falls and falls and falls. The train sits silent in its white prison, and morning, when it comes, will bring with it the impossible. Dawn arrives not as light, but as a gradual lessening of darkness, a shift from black to grey to a pale, anemic white that seems to emanate from the snow itself rather than from any sun. The landscape revealed by this grudging illumination is both beautiful and terrible, an endless expanse of white moorland broken only by the dark slash of the train, sitting motionless like a toy abandoned in a field of cotton. The drifts have piled against the carriages during the night, reaching halfway up the windows on the windward side, and the wind continues to sculpt the snow into fantastic shapes. Waves frozen mid-crest, ripples that suggest a sea turned solid. Inside the first-class carriage, the temperature has dropped to something merely tolerable rather than comfortable. Passengers wake stiff and irritable, their breath visible in small clouds. Their planned Christmas journey is now reduced to this: waiting in an elegant metal box while the world outside demonstrates its absolute indifference to human schedules and human comfort. Watson wakes to find Holmes already dressed and standing in the corridor outside their compartment, speaking in low tones with the conductor. The older man's face is grey with exhaustion and something else. Something that makes Watson's military instincts prickle with warning even before he's fully conscious. He joins them, still buttoning his waistcoat. "What's happened?" The conductor glances at Holmes, who nods slightly. Permission granted, apparently, though for what Watson cannot yet say. "It's Mr. Blackwood, sir," the conductor says, his voice carefully controlled. "His valet came to me not 10 minutes ago, says he's been knocking on his master's door since 7 o'clock and getting no response. The compartment is locked from the inside and—" He pauses, swallows. "And Mr. Blackwood isn't answering. Perhaps he's simply a heavy sleeper," Watson suggests. Though even as he says it, he knows it's wrong. Men like Blackwood, men travelling in fear, do not sleep heavily. They sleep like rabbits, starting at every sound. The valet says his master always wakes at 6:30 precisely, has done for 20 years. And there's something else. He claims he heard sounds from the compartment around 3 this morning. "A thump," he said, like something heavy falling. But when he knocked, there was no answer then either. Holmes is already moving down the corridor, Watson and the conductor following. A small knot of passengers has gathered outside Blackwood's compartment. The valet Jenkins hovering anxiously, Mrs. Ashford wrapped in a travelling shawl and watching with cool assessment, Reverend Pemberton looking concerned in the professional manner of clergymen confronted with potential tragedy. Miss Hartley stands slightly apart, her notebook already in hand, though she's not yet writing, simply watching everything with the hungry attention of someone whose job is to witness. The compartment door is indeed locked, the curtain drawn across its window from the inside. Holmes knocks sharply 3 times. "Mr. Blackwood, this is a concerned fellow passenger. Are you well?" Silence. Not even the rustle of bedclothes or the creak of someone shifting position, just the absolute quiet of an empty room. "How long has it been?" Holmes asks Jenkins. The valet wrings his hands, a gesture so theatrical it would be comic in other circumstances. "Since 7 o'clock, sir. I brought his tea as always, was Mr. Blackwood is most particular about his morning tea, must have it at 7 precisely. But he wouldn't answer. I thought perhaps he was indisposed, you understand, so I waited. But it's been nearly an hour now and—" "Did you try the door?" "Locked, sir. From the inside, by the sound of it. The bolt is thrown. I can hear it rattling when I try the handle." Holmes crouches to examine the lock, producing a small lens from his pocket. The other passengers watch this performance with varying degrees of interest and alarm. Watson recognises the signs. His friend is no longer playing at being a civil servant on holiday. The mask has dropped, and Sherlock Holmes is fully present, focused entirely on the puzzle presenting itself. "Conductor," Holmes says without looking up, "I must ask you to open this door. I believe we may have cause for concern." "Sir, I can't simply break into a passenger's compartment." "Then use your master key. You do have one, I presume." The conductor hesitates, caught between regulation and instinct. It's Mrs. Ashford who decides the matter. "For heaven's sake, man, if something's wrong in there, we can't simply stand about debating propriety. Open the door." Thus authorised by the collective will of the first class, the conductor produces a ring of keys from his pocket and selects one with shaking fingers. The lock clicks open with surprising ease, but the door moves only an inch before catching on something, the internal bolt still thrown from the inside. "It's locked from within," the conductor confirms unnecessarily. Holmes straightens, his expression unreadable. "Then we force it. Mr. Watson, if you would assist." Together they put their shoulders to the door and the bolt, designed to provide privacy rather than security, gives way with a crack of splintering wood. The door swings open and they stumble into Cornelius Blackwood's compartment. It is empty. Not empty in the sense of temporarily unoccupied, empty in the profound and impossible sense of a space from which a human being has simply vanished. The sleeping berth has been used, the blankets thrown back as if someone rose in haste. The small table is folded down, and on it sits a brandy glass with perhaps an inch of amber liquid still remaining. A book lies open, face down on the seat. A ledger of some kind filled with columns of figures in neat handwriting. But Cornelius Blackwood himself is nowhere to be seen. Watson checks the small water closet adjoining the compartment. Empty. He looks under the berth, in the luggage rack above, even behind the curtains in the irrational hope that this is somehow a prank, a misunderstanding. Nothing. The man has simply ceased to exist. On the seat, placed with almost ceremonial precision, sits Blackwood's beaver fur hat, the expensive kind that marks a man of wealth and status. And on the window ledge, catching the pale morning light, is a smear of something green and waxy, about the size of a thumbprint. Holmes stands in the centre of the compartment, turning slowly, his eyes cataloguing every detail. The other passengers crowd in the doorway, their concern now shifting to something else. Confusion mixed with the first prickles of fear. "This is impossible," Jenkins whispers. "He was here. He locked the door himself from the inside. I heard the bolt slide home." "What time was that?" Holmes asks sharply. "Just after 1 o'clock, sir. I brought him a nightcap. He always has a small brandy before retiring, and he dismissed me for the evening. I heard him lock the door behind me." "And you heard nothing else until 3 o'clock?" "The thump, sir, yes. I was in my own compartment directly next door." He points to the partition wall. "It woke me. Not a loud sound, you understand, but distinctive, like something heavy being dropped. Or—" He trails off, unable to articulate what else it might have been. Holmes moves to the window, examining it with minute attention. It is a standard railway window, designed to lower for ventilation, currently raised, and he tests it carefully, locked from the inside with a small brass catch. The snow has drifted against the exterior, and through the glass Watson can see the unbroken white surface. No marks or disturbance visible. "The window is locked," Holmes announces, "and frozen shut besides. You can see the ice in the seams. It hasn't been opened." He turns his attention to the door, examining the broken bolt mechanism. The bolt was definitely thrown from the inside. The wood splintered inward when we forced entry, which confirms the direction of resistance. Reverend Pemberton clears his throat. "Forgive me, but could Mr. Blackwood have left his compartment earlier in the night? Perhaps he felt unwell, went searching for assistance and collapsed somewhere else on the train? With the door still bolted from inside," Watson points out gently. "Unless he's developed the ability to walk through walls, I don't see how—" "Search the train," Holmes interrupts. "Conductor, organise a systematic check of every carriage, every compartment, every storage space. Mr. Watson, you and I will examine this room more thoroughly." The crowd disperses with varying degrees of reluctance, the conductor marshalling passengers into search parties with the air of a man who has completely lost control of his carefully ordered world. Only Holmes and Watson remain, alone in the impossible room. Watson closes the door, or rather closes it as well as the broken bolt allows, and leans against it. "Holmes, this is fascinating," Holmes suggests, already on his knees examining the floor. "Indeed it is. A locked room mystery, Watson, and we are trapped inside it both literally and figuratively. Rather poetic, don't you think? I was going to say impossible. Nothing is impossible, merely improbable, inadequately explained or cleverly staged." He produces his lens again, scrutinizing. The carpet with the intensity most men reserve for religious texts. The question is not whether Blackwood left this room. Clearly he did, or rather, clearly he is not in it, which amounts to the same thing. The question is how he achieved this feat while leaving the door bolted and the window locked from the interior. Watson moves to examine the window more closely, pressing his hand against the glass. It is cold enough to burn, and the ice in the seal is genuine. He can see the crystalline structure where the frame meets the pane. Could he have gone out through the window and somehow refastened it from outside? In principle, perhaps, though I cannot immediately see how. And even if he managed such acrobatics, where did he go? Holmes gestures toward the snow-covered landscape visible through the glass. The snow is unbroken for 50 yards in every direction. If he jumped or climbed down, we would see tracks, disturbance, something. But there is nothing. Then he must have left through the door. A door that was bolted from the inside until we forced it open. Holmes sits back on his heels, his expression thoughtful. Unless, of course, someone else was in this room with him. Someone who left after Blackwood, bolting the door from inside before— What? Vanishing themselves? You're suggesting an accomplice? I'm suggesting nothing yet. I am merely cataloguing impossibilities and hoping one of them proves less impossible than the others. He rises, moving to the small table where the brandy glass sits. Producing a handkerchief, he carefully lifts the glass and sniffs its contents. His eyebrows rise fractionally. What is it? Brandy, certainly, but something else as well, a faint bitterness underlying the spirit. It could be nothing, merely a characteristic of the particular vintage. Or... He sets the glass down carefully. We should preserve this, and that. He points to the green waxy substance on the window ledge. Watson examines the smear more closely. It is definitely wax, candle wax presumably, but an unusual colour. Not the standard cream or white of common tapers, but a distinct greenish tint. Could this be significant? Everything in a locked room is potentially significant, Watson. The locked door tells us nothing happened normally. Therefore, everything that did happen must be examined for abnormality. Holmes produces a small penknife and carefully scrapes a sample of the wax into an envelope he draws from his pocket. This is not from the train's standard lamp, so they use oil, not candles. So Blackwood brought it himself, or someone brought it to him. For what purpose? An excellent question. Holmes moves to Blackwood's travelling case, sitting unopened on the luggage rack. He tests the locks, secure and of very high quality. Brummer locks on luggage. Our Mr. Blackwood was a cautious man, or a frightened one. Should we open it? Not yet. First, let us complete our examination of what Blackwood left behind. He picks up the open ledger, studying the columns of figures. His expression grows increasingly intent as he turns pages, reading the neat accountancy with the speed of someone trained to extract meaning from numbers. Interesting. These appear to be records of investments, mining concerns in Wales, diamond exploration in Africa, just as I suspected. But look here. He points to a series of entries marked in red ink. These are losses, substantial losses. Blackwood was not quite the successful industrialist the newspapers suggest. He was in financial difficulty, drowning in it by these figures, and look at the dates, all within the past 6 months. Whatever enterprise Blackwood built, it has been crumbling beneath him. Holmes closes the ledger thoughtfully. A man facing ruin might do desperate things. Flee the country, perhaps. Stage his own disappearance to escape creditors or worse. But how does one stage a disappearance from a locked room on a snowbound train? That, Holmes says with something approaching pleasure, is precisely what makes this interesting. A knock at the broken door interrupts them. The conductor appears, his face pale. Mr. Holmes, I understand you've taken charge of this matter. The passengers are asking what they should do, and I confess I don't know what to tell them. Has the search turned up anything? Nothing, sir. Mr. Blackwood is not in any of the carriages, not in the storage areas, not in the staff quarters. It's as if he simply evaporated. Holmes nods slowly. Gather the passengers in the dining car in 1 hour. I will need to interview each of them individually. And conductor, no one is to enter this compartment until I've finished my examination. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Though I should mention, the railway company will send help as soon as the weather permits. The telegraph reached them before the lines went down in the storm, but with the snow still falling, he trails off helplessly. Which means we are isolated, Holmes finishes. A closed circle, as it were. Everyone who was on this train when Blackwood disappeared is still on this train. His secrets are here, his solution is here, and quite possibly his body is here, hidden somewhere we haven't yet thought to look. You think he's dead? Watson asks quietly. Holmes looks at him, and for a moment the excitement of the puzzle fades, replaced by something more sombre. I think, Watson, that men do not vanish from locked rooms while in good health and sound mind. Something happened in this compartment between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock this morning. Something that required Blackwood to leave or be removed, but left behind only a hat, a smear of wax, and a room sealed from the inside. He turns back to the window, gazing out at the endless white landscape. And we have until the snow stops and rescue arrives to determine what that something was. After that, the circle opens, the passengers disperse, and the truth disperses with them. The train sits silent around them, a small island of human endeavour in an ocean of white. Somewhere in its corridors and compartments, answers wait. And somewhere, perhaps, Cornelius Blackwood waits too, whether dead or alive, hidden or fled, victim or architect of his own impossible vanishing. The game, as Holmes would say, is afoot, even if the playing field is currently buried under 3 feet of snow. The dining car has been transformed into an impromptu investigation chamber, though Holmes has resisted Watson's suggestion to call it anything so dramatic. "We are merely having conversations," he insisted while arranging the tables. "Conversations with people who happen to be proximate to an unexplained disappearance. Nothing formal, nothing alarming." "Nothing alarming," Watson echoes, watching through the window as Holmes circles the exterior of the train for the 3rd time, examining the snow-covered sides of the carriages with the intensity of a man reading scripture. The detective is wrapped in his travelling coat, hatless despite the cold, his dark hair already dusted with snow. He moves carefully along the narrow margin between the train and the drift, occasionally crouching to peer at something only he can see, sometimes reaching out to touch the metal siding as if it might speak to him. Watson has given up trying to accompany him on these expeditions. His war-wounded leg protests vigorously at the combination of cold and uneven terrain. And besides, Holmes works better alone, or rather, works better with Watson as audience rather than participant, free to think aloud without the burden of collaboration. The other passengers watch Holmes's perambulations with varying degrees of interest and unease. They have gathered in small clusters throughout the dining car, united by circumstance but divided by suspicion. The veneer of polite society is beginning to crack under the pressure of the impossible, and Watson can see the fracture line spreading. Mrs. Ashford sits alone at a corner table, her mineralogy text open before her, though Watson notices she hasn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Her eyes track Holmes through the window with an attention that suggests calculation rather than idle curiosity. She has changed from her travelling costume into a day dress of charcoal grey, mourning colours still, but practical ones, chosen for a long wait in imperfect conditions. Jenkins, the valet, occupies another table, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea that has long since gone cold. He looks diminished without his master, like a shadow that has lost the object casting it. Every few minutes he glances toward the corridor that leads to Blackwood's compartment, as if expecting the man to emerge and explain that this has all been an elaborate test of his servant's devotion. Reverend Pemberton has appointed himself the group's spiritual counsellor, moving from table to table offering platitudes about divine providence and the mysterious ways in which the Lord works. His cheerfulness has acquired a brittle quality, and Watson notices that his jokes no longer quite reach his eyes. The man is frightened, though he hides it behind layers of professional benevolence, Miss Hartley writes. She has commandeered an entire table for her notebooks and papers, and her pencil moves ceaselessly, recording everything: conversations, observations, the timestamps of events, sketches of the carriage layout. She is building her story, Watson realizes, constructing the narrative even as they live through it. When she catches him watching, she doesn't look away but holds his gaze with the directness of someone who has learned that apologizing for her presence only invites others to question it. The dining car door opens, admitting a gust of frigid air and Holmes, stamping snow from his boots. His cheeks are flushed with cold, his eyes bright with the particular intensity that means he has found something worth finding. "Watson," he says without preamble, "a word, if you please." They retreat to the corridor, out of earshot of the assembled passengers. Holmes produces his notebook, flipping to a page covered in sketches and measurements. "I've examined the entire exterior of Blackwood's compartment, the sides, the roof access, the undercarriage, everything. And I've found precisely nothing that explains how a man could exit a sealed room, which is itself quite informative." He points to one of his sketches. The snow against the train is undisturbed. No footprints, no handprints, no indication that anyone climbed out of that window or any other. The roof is accessible via ladder from the rear platform, but there are no tracks leading to or from the ladder, and the snow on the roof itself is pristine, wind-sculpted but unmarked by human passage. So he didn't leave through the window, not unless he can fly, which I think we can safely rule out. Moreover, I examined the window mechanism itself more closely. The lock is genuine, not tampered with, not staged, and the ice in the seal is real, formed from the inside by condensation freezing against the cold glass. That window hasn't been opened in at least 12 hours, possibly longer. Watson feels a headache beginning to form behind his eyes. Then we're back to the door. He must have left through the door. A door that was bolted from the inside. Holmes taps his pencil against the notebook. unless someone bolted it after he left. But that raises the question of how they then exited themselves, since the bolt can only be manipulated from inside the room. Could there be a mechanism? Some way to throw the bolt from outside using string or wire? I examined the door thoroughly. No holes drilled through the frame, no gaps wide enough to admit even the finest wire, and the conductor confirms that the bolt was genuinely thrown when we forced entry. He saw it himself, saw the metal slide free, when the wood splintered. Holmes closes the notebook with a snap. No, Watson. If this is a trick, it's not a mechanical one, which suggests something more subtle. Such as? I don't know yet, but I believe the interviews will prove enlightening. People lie, Watson, but they rarely lie perfectly. They leave gaps, inconsistencies, tells. And in a closed environment like this, where everyone's movements are constrained and observable, those inconsistencies become magnified. They return to the dining car where Holmes positions himself at the central table, like a magistrate preparing for court. Ladies and gentlemen, he announces, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I would like to speak with each of you individually about last night's events. This is not an interrogation, merely an attempt to establish a timeline and perhaps shed light on Mr. Blackwood's whereabouts. I trust I can count on your cooperation. Murmurs of assent, though Mrs. Ashford's is notably tepid. Holmes gestures to Jenkins. Perhaps we might begin with you, Mr. Jenkins. You knew Mr. Blackwood's habits better than anyone. The valet approaches the table with the nervous energy of a man about to confess sins he doesn't remember committing. Watson takes a seat nearby, notebook in hand, prepared to record the proceedings. Tell me about last evening, Holmes begins gently. After dinner, what were Mr. Blackwood's movements? Jenkins swallows audibly. He retired to his compartment around 9 o'clock, sir. Said he was tired from the journey and wanted to review some papers. I helped him prepare for the evening. Laid out his night clothes, brought him his brandy at 1 o'clock as usual. Did he seem agitated? Worried? Mr. Blackwood was always somewhat anxious, sir, particularly during travel. He preferred secure accommodations, insisted on the best locks, that sort of thing. But last night, Jenkins hesitates, choosing his words carefully. Last night he seemed more tense than usual. He kept checking the window, the door, asked me twice if I was certain the lock was sound. Did he say what he was afraid of? No, sir. Mr. Blackwood didn't confide in me about such matters. I was his valet, not his confidant. Holmes nods, making a note. When you brought him the brandy at 1 o'clock, did you notice anything unusual in the compartment? Unusual how, sir? Anything out of place? Any objects that shouldn't have been there? Any scents you didn't recognise? Any sounds from neighbouring compartments? Jenkins furrows his brow, thinking. The compartment was tidy as always. Mr. Blackwood was in his nightclothes, sitting at the table with his ledger. He drank the brandy I brought. I watched him take the first sip, as I always do, to ensure it's to his satisfaction. He dismissed me shortly after, and I heard him bolt the door behind me. You're certain it was bolted? Absolutely, sir. I know that sound. A solid click and slide. Mr. Blackwood was most particular about securing his door at night. And you retired to your own compartment? Yes, sir. Directly next door, as I mentioned. I prepared for bed and was asleep within the half hour. Until the thump at 3 o'clock woke you. Jenkins nods miserably. It wasn't terribly loud, sir, but distinctive. Like a heavy bag being dropped, or... He trails off, unable to complete the thought. I knocked on Mr. Blackwood's door, called his name. No answer. I tried again several times, then finally gave up and went back to bed, thinking perhaps he'd taken a sleeping draught and was simply too insensible to respond. Did you hear anything else? Voices, footsteps, movement in the corridor? Nothing, sir. The train was utterly quiet. Holmes dismisses him with thanks and calls for Mrs. Ashford next. She rises with the grace of someone who has long since stopped caring about appearances and approaches the table with her book still in hand, her finger marking her place. Mrs. Ashford, Holmes begins, I understand you're in mourning. May I ask how long you've been widowed? Her eyebrow arches slightly. Is that relevant to Mr. Blackwood's disappearance? Everything is potentially relevant until proven otherwise. 3 years. Her tone is clipped, offering no elaboration. And your husband's profession? He was a mining engineer, worked primarily in Wales and the Midlands. Something flickers in her expression. Not grief, Watson thinks, but something harder. Anger, perhaps, or betrayal. Did your husband know Cornelius Blackwood? Now her composure cracks just slightly. Why would you ask that? Because you're reading a treatise on mineralogy while travelling during Christmas week, and you've positioned yourself in the dining car with a clear view of Mr. Blackwood's table. Because when his name is mentioned, your knuckles whiten around your teacup. Because you are here, on this train, at this time, and coincidences trouble me. Mrs. Ashford closes her book with deliberate care. My husband did business with Mr. Blackwood, an investment scheme involving Welsh coal mines during the strikes of '87. Blackwood promised substantial returns, convinced my husband to invest everything we had. Our savings, our home, everything. The mines failed. My husband lost everything, and 6 months later, he put a pistol to his head in our bedroom. The words fall like stones into still water, sending ripples of shocked silence through the dining car. Watson sees Miss Hartley's pencil pause, hovering over her notebook. I'm very sorry, Holmes says quietly, and sounds like he means it. Are you? Because I'm not. I'm not sorry that Cornelius Blackwood has vanished from a locked room like some conjurer's trick. I'm not sorry that he's finally experiencing the fear he inflicted on others. I'm only sorry I wasn't there to watch. Did you harm him, Mrs. Ashford? She laughs, a short, bitter sound. I would have, given the opportunity. But no, I spent last evening in my compartment, reading, alone. No witnesses, I'm afraid, so you'll have to decide whether to believe me based on your famous powers of deduction. She stands, tucking her book under her arm. But I will tell you this, Mr. Holmes. Cornelius Blackwood destroyed my life and the lives of dozens of other families. If he's dead, the world is better for it. And if he's merely hiding from his sins, they'll find him eventually. They always do. She returns to her table, leaving Holmes staring after her with an expression Watson knows well. The look of a man who has just been handed a piece of the puzzle and isn't sure where it fits. Before Holmes can call the next interview, Miss Hartley rises unbidden and approaches their table. May I save you the trouble of summoning me? She asks, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency of someone who values time. I have information you'll want. Holmes gestures to the empty chair. By all means. She sits, opening her notebook to a marked page. My name is Margaret Hartley. I write for the London Reformer, investigative journalism, primarily focused on financial malfeasance and corruption. For the past 3 months, I've been researching Cornelius Blackwood and his business practices. You've been following him, Holmes states. I've been investigating him. There's a difference. Blackwood ran multiple investment schemes over the past decade, each one following the same pattern. Big promises, initial returns to attract more investors, then sudden collapse with Blackwood walking away largely unscathed while his investors lost everything. Mrs. Ashford's husband is one of at least 30 confirmed victims. There may be hundreds more. Why hasn't he been prosecuted? Because he's clever. Technically, everything he did was legal. Risky investments, market fluctuations, forces beyond his control. He never actually stole money, just mismanaged it spectacularly, while ensuring his own assets remained protected. She flips to another page. My editor sent me to follow him, document his movements, see if he was planning another scheme. I boarded this train specifically because Blackwood did. Did he recognize you? He noticed me. Whether he knew who I was or simply that I was watching him, I can't say. But yesterday evening at dinner, our eyes met, and I saw recognition. Or at least wariness. Holmes leans forward. Miss Hartley, where were you between 1 and 3 o'clock this morning? In my compartment, writing up my notes from the day. I heard nothing unusual until the commotion this morning about Blackwood's disappearance. Can anyone confirm your whereabouts? She smiles thinly. No. Which makes me a suspect, I suppose. Along with Mrs. Ashford, the nervous valet, the suspiciously jovial reverend, and whoever else had reason to want Cornelius Blackwood gone. Which, Mr. Holmes, appears to be nearly everyone on this train. Watson watches Holmes absorb this information, filing it away in the vast organised archive of his mind. The picture emerging is clear. Blackwood was a man with enemies, travelling in fear, who vanished impossibly from a locked room while surrounded by people who wished him harm. But wanting someone dead and making them vanish from a sealed compartment are vastly different achievements. Outside, the snow continues to fall, sealing them more thoroughly into their frozen isolation with each passing hour. And somewhere in the train or in the drifts beyond, Cornelius Blackwood remains either hidden or dead, a mystery wrapped in an impossibility, waiting for Sherlock Holmes to untangle it. The afternoon sun makes a half-hearted attempt to penetrate the clouds, managing only to transform the landscape from white to a slightly brighter white. Inside the train, the passengers have settled into an uneasy routine, waiting, watching, wondering. The heating struggles valiantly against the cold, and conversation has given way to the kind of exhausted silence that follows too much speculation and too few answers. Holmes has commandeered Blackwood's compartment as his base of operations, much to the conductor's dismay, but with his grudging permission. "It's irregular," the conductor protested weakly. "The railway has procedures." "The railway," Holmes interrupted with devastating politeness, "is currently buried under 3 feet of snow with one passenger missing from a locked room. I think we can agree that we've moved beyond the realm of standard procedures." Watson finds him there now, surrounded by carefully arranged evidence like a general surveying a battlefield. The beaver fur hat sits on the table, the brandy glass beside it, the envelope containing the green wax nearby. Holmes has added to this collection samples of carpet fibre, scrapings from the window frame, a detailed diagram of the compartment's dimensions and the placement of every object within it. "The rescue crew should arrive by tomorrow morning," Watson reports, settling onto the compartment's bench. "The conductor received word via the telegraph before the lines went down completely. They're clearing the tracks from both directions, but the weather is slowing progress considerably." Holmes doesn't look up from the document he's studying, Blackwood's ledger now open to a page dense with calculations. "Tomorrow morning," which means we have perhaps 18 hours before this closed circle opens and our suspects disperse to the 4 winds. Hardly adequate time for a proper investigation. Perhaps the authorities will arrive with frozen feet and frozen minds, Watson. They'll catalogue the obvious, interview everyone perfunctorily, and conclude that Blackwood either staged his own disappearance or met with some accident we cannot explain. The case will remain open indefinitely, which is another way of saying it will never be solved. He closes the ledger with a snap. "No, if we're to understand what happened here, it must be now, while the circumstances remain fresh and the participants remain trapped." "You sound almost pleased about being trapped." Holmes's smile is brief. "I am pleased by the intellectual challenge of a genuinely impossible problem. The discomfort of being snowbound is merely the price of admission." He rises, pacing the small compartment with the restless energy Watson recognizes as thought in motion. "Consider what we know. Blackwood was a man with enemies, multiple enemies, each with legitimate grievances. Mrs. Ashford's husband dead by his own hand after losing everything in one of Blackwood's schemes. Miss Hartley investigating him for fraud. And those are merely the enemies we know about aboard this train. There may be others." The valet seemed genuinely distressed. Perhaps he's an excellent actor. Jenkins has served Blackwood for years, watching his master grow wealthy while he remains a servant. That breeds resentment, Watson. And resentment, given the right circumstances, breeds action. Watson shifts uncomfortably on the bench, and Reverend Pemberton, surely a man of the cloth, is still a man, with all the attendant weaknesses and motivations. I haven't interviewed him properly yet, but I intend to. His joviality strikes me as performed rather than genuine, and performed emotions always warrant investigation. Holmes pauses at the window, staring out at the white expanse. But the who is less troubling than the how. Even assuming someone wanted Blackwood dead or gone, how did they achieve it? The locked room remains our central problem. He turns back to Watson, his expression intent. "I've been considering various possibilities. Suppose Blackwood left the compartment voluntarily, perhaps to meet someone, or to escape some immediate threat. He exits through the door and his killer follows him, then returns to bolt the door from inside before escaping themselves. Through what? The walls? Through a gap we haven't discovered, a ventilation shaft perhaps, or some feature of the train's construction that allows movement between compartments without using the corridor." Holmes moves to the wall shared with Jenkins' compartment, running his hands over the panelling. Victorian railway carriages are marvels of compact engineering. Space must be maximised, which means clever use of every cubic inch. It's conceivable that... He stops, his fingers finding something. A slight depression in the wood, almost invisible unless you know where to look. He presses it, and a small section of panelling shifts inward with a soft click. Watson is on his feet immediately. "Good Lord, is that—" "A service panel," Holmes says, pulling the section of wall open to reveal a narrow cavity behind it. "For accessing the heating pipes and ventilation system. Most passengers would never notice it, but someone familiar with railway construction." He peers into the darkness beyond, then produces a match and strikes it, illuminating the cramped space. The cavity is perhaps 18 inches wide, running vertically between the compartments. Pipes and ductwork occupy most of the space, but there's room, barely, for a slender person to squeeze through if they were determined enough or desperate enough. "This connects to Jenkins's compartment," Watson asks. Holmes nods slowly, the match burning down toward his fingers before he drops it and lights another. And possibly to others. These service cavities often run the length of the carriage, with access panels in multiple locations. Someone could, in theory, move between compartments without ever entering the corridor. Someone slender, Watson points out. Blackwood was a large man. He couldn't possibly fit through there. No, but someone else could. Holmes closes the panel carefully, his expression thoughtful. Someone could enter this compartment through the service cavity while Blackwood was here, commit their crime, then exit the same way, leaving the door bolted from inside. From the corridor, it would appear to be a perfect locked room. But the thump Jenkins heard at 3 o'clock could have been Blackwood's body being moved, or something else entirely. Jenkins' timeline may not be reliable. He was, after all, in the next compartment, separated by this wall with its convenient hidden passage. Watson feels excitement building despite himself. You think Jenkins killed his master? I think Jenkins is a possibility. He had access, opportunity, and potentially motive. Years of resentment, perhaps knowledge of Blackwood's business dealings that made him complicit in fraud he found unconscionable. Holmes begins pacing again, faster now. But Mrs. Ashford is also slender enough to fit through that cavity, and Miss Hartley, and for that matter, we haven't properly investigated Reverend Pemberton's physical build. "This is monstrous," Watson murmurs. "Moving between walls like rats, committing murder in locked rooms." "If it is murder," Holmes cautions, "we still have no body, no definitive proof of death. Blackwood may yet be alive, hiding somewhere on this train or even outside it, though the latter seems increasingly unlikely given the weather and the undisturbed snow." A knock at the broken door interrupts them. The conductor appears, looking harried. "Mr. Holmes, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's been a development. We've been searching the luggage car more thoroughly and—" He pauses, collecting himself. "We found something belonging to Mr. Blackwood." They follow him through the swaying corridors to the luggage car near the rear of the train, a utilitarian space stacked high with trunks and travelling cases. The temperature here is noticeably colder. The heating system prioritizes passenger compartments, leaving the cargo areas to fend for themselves against the winter. The conductor leads them to a large steamer trunk positioned against the far wall. "We were reorganizing, trying to account for all the luggage in case we needed an accurate inventory. And we found this." He indicates a label tied to the trunk's handle. "It's marked as belonging to Mr. Blackwood, but it wasn't in his compartment. It was here, mixed in with the general luggage." Holmes crouches beside the trunk, examining the label and the locks. The latter are of high quality. Brammer locks again, Blackwood's preferred security measure. "Conductor, do you have the authority to open passengers' luggage in emergency circumstances?" Yes, technically, though it's highly irregular. Everything about this situation is irregular. Please open it." The conductor produces his ring of master keys, trying several before finding one that fits. The locks click open with satisfying precision, and together he and Holmes lift the heavy lid. The trunk is packed with clothes, expensive suits, silk shirts, all the accoutrements of a wealthy man's wardrobe. But Holmes immediately begins removing these items, handing them to Watson without ceremony, digging deeper into the trunk's contents. Near the bottom, wrapped in a velvet cloth, he finds a wooden box. It's perhaps 18 inches long and a foot wide, made of dark wood with brass fittings, and it's locked with yet another Brammer mechanism. "This requires more specialized tools than you possess, I suspect," Holmes says to the conductor. "Watson, hand me that pry bar." "Holmes, you can't simply destroy a passenger's property. Would you prefer I wait until Blackwood returns to file a formal complaint? Hand me the bar, Watson." With some effort and considerable damage to the brass fittings, Holmes forces the box open. Inside, nestled in fitted compartments, are documents, deeds, contracts, stock certificates, and beneath those something more interesting. Bundles of currency, pounds sterling, a considerable amount, carefully wrapped and arranged. "He was planning to flee," Watson breathes. "This is escape money." Holmes nods, lifting one of the bundles and examining it. Several £1,000s, I'd estimate. Enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere the reach of British law and British creditors doesn't extend. And look at this. He extracts a document from between the currency bundles. A ticket for passage to Cape Town departing from Liverpool on December 28th, under the name James Morrison. A false identity? Precisely. Blackwood was planning to vanish, not from a locked room, but from his entire life. Leave England, abandon his debts and his victims, reinvent himself in Africa where his mining connections might prove valuable. Holmes returns the document to the box carefully. This changes the entire complexion of the case. We're not necessarily looking at murder. We might be looking at the successful execution of a very carefully planned escape. But how? Watson protests. How does one escape from a moving train in a blizzard, leaving no tracks, no trace? Unless one didn't escape during the blizzard, Holmes interrupts, his voice taking on the tone that means pieces are falling into place. Unless one escaped before it, or after, or... He stops, his expression going distant in the way that means he's seeing connections Watson cannot yet perceive. Holmes? The candle wax, Holmes says suddenly. Green candle wax, an unusual colour. Watson, theatrical makeup artists use coloured waxes for various purposes, creating fake wounds, sealing prosthetics, even disguising one's appearance temporarily. What if that wax served a similar purpose here? You're suggesting Blackwood disguised himself? I'm suggesting that when one wishes to vanish, the most effective method is not to leave entirely, but to remain present while appearing to be someone else. Change your clothes, alter your appearance, adopt a different manner. Suddenly you're invisible, hiding in plain sight. Holmes snaps the box shut. We need to re-interview everyone on this train, not as witnesses to Blackwood's disappearance, but as potential Blackwoods themselves. Watson stares at him. You think Blackwood is still on the train, disguised as another passenger? I think it's a possibility we haven't adequately explored. Consider, a wealthy industrialist wishes to escape his creditors and his crimes. He stages an elaborate disappearance from a locked room, certain to attract attention and investigation, while simultaneously transforming himself into someone else. Everyone searches for the missing man while the man himself walks freely among them, waiting for the train to reach its destination where he can slip away in the chaos of arrival. But the locked room is theatre, Watson, misdirection. While we obsess over the impossible mechanics of his vanishing, he's laughing at us from behind a false beard or a clever costume. Holmes straightens, his energy renewed by this new theory. Come, we're going to gather everyone in the dining car again, and this time we're going to look at them not as they appear, but as they might be. They make their way back through the train, Holmes's mind clearly racing ahead of his feet. Watson follows, divided between scepticism and the intoxicating possibility that his friend might be right. The train sits motionless in its prison of snow, but inside the mystery has begun to move again, pieces shifting, new patterns emerging from the chaos. And somewhere aboard, in a compartment, in the corridor, perhaps even in the luggage car itself, the truth waits to be discovered. The sun is setting now, the short December day surrendering to another night. But this night, Watson suspects, will be different from the last. This night, Sherlock Holmes knows what he's looking for. Evening settles over the snowbound train like a held breath, the light fading from pearl grey to charcoal to the deep blue-black of a winter night far from any city's glow. The lamps are lit, throughout the carriages casting their warm amber light against windows that have become mirrors, reflecting the passengers back to themselves. Outside, the wind has finally died, leaving the snow to fall in perfect vertical lines, silent and relentless. Holmes has arranged the dining car with the precision of a man setting a stage. All the passengers are assembled, Mrs. Ashford at her customary corner table, Miss Hartley with her notebooks, Jenkins hovering nervously near the door, Reverend Pemberton occupying the centre with his diminished but persistent joviality. The conductor stands against the wall, his authority reduced to that of observer, recognising that control of this situation passed to Sherlock Holmes hours ago. Watson takes his position near Holmes, notebook ready, though he suspects much of what is about to occur will defy easy transcription. His friend has that particular quality of contained energy that precedes revelation, the calm before the intellectual storm. Ladies and gentlemen, Holmes begins, his voice carrying effortlessly through the car. I appreciate your patience during what has been a trying and peculiar day. I believe I now understand what happened to Cornelius Blackwood, and with your indulgence I will explain. Mrs. Ashford sets down her teacup with deliberate care. You found him? In a manner of speaking, but first let me lay out what we know. The facts that cannot be disputed, the foundation upon which our understanding must be built. Holmes begins to pace, his hands clasped behind his back in the manner of a university lecturer. Mr. Blackwood retired to his compartment last night around 9 o'clock. His valet, Mr. Jenkins, brought him brandy at 1 o'clock and heard him bolt the door from inside shortly thereafter. At approximately 3 o'clock, Jenkins heard a thump from Blackwood's compartment. This morning the compartment was found locked from within, but Blackwood himself had vanished, leaving behind only his hat and a curious smear of green wax. He pauses, letting this sink in. The question that has occupied us all day is, how? How does a man vanish from a locked room? The answer, as is so often the case, is that he doesn't. Then where is he? Miss Hartley asks, her pencil poised. Patience, Miss Hartley. We shall get there. Holmes moves to the window, gesturing at the snow-covered landscape beyond. I initially considered the possibility that Blackwood left through the window, despite its being locked from inside, but the undisturbed snow eliminates that theory. I then discovered the service cavity in the compartment wall, a passage through which someone slender might move between rooms without using the corridor. Jenkins goes pale. You can't think I considered it, Holmes says mildly. You had access, opportunity, and potentially motive. As did Mrs. Ashford, whose husband was ruined by Blackwood's schemes. As did Miss Hartley, whose investigation might have driven her to more direct action. Even Reverend Pemberton warranted consideration once I learned that his sister's family lost their home, investing in one of Blackwood's mining ventures. The Reverend's cheerful mask slips entirely. How did you... Your sister's name is visible in your prayer book, which you left on your table during our interviews. A simple matter to connect her married name to the list of Blackwood's victims that Miss Hartley was kind enough to share with me. Holmes turns back to face them all. In short, everyone on this train had reason to want Blackwood gone, which made me consider, perhaps that's precisely what Blackwood wanted us to think. Watson leans forward, beginning to see the shape of it. The locked room was deliberate misdirection. Exactly, Watson. While we obsessed over the impossible mechanics of his disappearance, we failed to ask a more fundamental question. Who benefits most from Cornelius Blackwood being believed dead or missing? Holmes produces the document he found in Blackwood's trunk. I discovered this in Blackwood's luggage, a ticket to Cape Town under a false name, departure date December 28th, along with several £1,000s in currency. Blackwood wasn't fleeing from danger. He was fleeing from justice, from debt, from the consequences of a decade of financial malfeasance. So he staged his own disappearance, Mrs. Ashford says slowly. But that still doesn't explain how he escaped a locked room. Because he didn't escape it. He never left it. Or rather, Holmes's expression sharpens with satisfaction. He left it exactly the way anyone would leave a room, through the door, but not at 3 o'clock in the morning. Earlier, much earlier. He moves to stand before Jenkins. Tell me again what happened when you brought Blackwood his brandy at 1 o'clock. The valet swallows nervously. I knocked. He admitted me. I set down the tray with the brandy. He dismissed me. I left and heard him bolt the door. And you saw him? Clearly? In good light? Well, the lamp was turned down low. Mr. Blackwood preferred dim lighting in the evening. But yes, I saw him. He was in his nightclothes sitting at the table. Did you look at his face? Jenkins hesitates. No, sir. It's not my place to stare at my employer. I kept my eyes appropriately lowered, precisely as a good servant should, which is exactly what Blackwood counted on. Holmes turns to address the entire car. The person Jenkins delivered brandy to at 1 o'clock was not Cornelius Blackwood. It was someone wearing Blackwood's nightclothes in a dimly lit room, someone who kept their face averted, someone who remained silent except for a grunt of dismissal, a sound anyone might make. After Jenkins left, this person bolted the door from inside, establishing our locked room. They waited until 3 o'clock, created the thump Jenkins heard, probably by dropping a heavy object, perhaps a book, and then escaped through the service cavity into an adjacent compartment. But who? Watson asks. Who was the accomplice? Holmes's smile is thin. There was no accomplice. Blackwood was working alone. He needed only to create the illusion of his presence in the compartment at 1 o'clock, then leave before anyone thought to question it. Miss Hartley shakes her head. That's impossible. Jenkins saw him. Jenkins saw someone in Blackwood's nightclothes in poor lighting and assumed it was Blackwood because why would it be anyone else? But consider the green wax I found on the window ledge. Theatrical wax used for disguise and deception. What if Blackwood used it to create a crude dummy, a form stuffed with pillows and clothing, positioned in the chair, given rough features with the coloured wax? In dim light, to a servant trained not to look too closely, he shrugs. The human mind fills in what it expects to see. Watson feels his understanding shifting, pieces rearranging. So Blackwood created a dummy, left it in the compartment and departed earlier in the evening? Not quite. He departed during the commotion when the train first stopped in the blizzard. Remember the chaos, the passengers moving about, the conductor and crew rushing to assess the situation. In that confusion, who would notice one more figure moving through the corridors? Blackwood slipped away from his compartment before Jenkins retired for the night, having already prepared his dummy and his locked room. He used the service cavity to move through the carriage unseen, and by the time Jenkins delivered brandy to the dummy at 1 o'clock, Blackwood was already elsewhere. Where? Mrs. Ashford demands. If he's still on the train, Holmes raises a hand. Patience. Let me complete the explanation. Blackwood's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Create an impossible disappearance that would dominate everyone's attention. While we searched for a vanished man, he would transform himself into someone unremarkable, someone no one would suspect or scrutinize, change clothes, adopt a different posture, perhaps use cosmetics to alter his features slightly. He had the theatrical wax, after all, which suggests some knowledge of disguise techniques. You're saying he's been hiding among us all day? Reverend Pemberton looks around nervously. Disguised as whom? That is the question I've been contemplating all afternoon. Holmes begins to pace again, his eyes moving from face to face. It would need to be someone whose presence wouldn't be questioned. Someone peripheral enough to avoid close examination. Someone... He stops abruptly, turning to look at the conductor standing against the wall. The man stiffens slightly, his expression shifting from curious to guarded in the space of a heartbeat. The crew, Holmes says softly. Of course. Who pays attention to the crew? They move through the train constantly, part of the background, functionally invisible to first-class passengers who barely register, servants as human beings. Blackwood didn't need an elaborate disguise. He needed only a uniform. Watson is on his feet now, staring at the conductor. But that's impossible. This man has been conducting the train since we left London. Has he? Holmes moves closer to the conductor, studying him with fresh eyes. Or have there been two conductors, rotating shifts, and we simply assumed it was the same man because the uniform was identical? The real conductor is likely bound and gagged in a storage compartment somewhere, having been overpowered when the train first stopped. Blackwood took his uniform, his keys, his authority, and has been moving through the train all day in perfect disguise, orchestrating the search for himself. The conductor, or rather the man in the conductor's uniform, doesn't move for a long moment. Then slowly his posture changes. The deferential stoop of a railway employee straightens into the more aggressive bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His face seems to shift, though physically it remains the same. It's the expression that changes, the inner person showing through the costume. Clever, says Cornelius Blackwood in the conductor's voice. Very clever, Mr. Holmes, though I shouldn't be surprised. Your reputation is well earned. The dining car erupts in shocked exclamations. Mrs. Ashford is on her feet, her face flushed with fury. Miss Hartley's pencil flies across her notebook, capturing every word. Jenkins simply stares, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Watson reaches into his coat, feeling for the service revolver he carries out of habit, but Holmes waves him off. Not necessary, Watson. Mr. Blackwood is trapped as surely as we are. The snow guarantees that. Blackwood, for it is undeniably him now, once you know to look past the uniform and the slight stoop he'd affected, smiles without humour. Trapped until the rescue crews arrive tomorrow morning, after which I slip away in the chaos of evacuation, just another railway employee doing his job. By the time anyone realises the real conductor has been found and I've vanished again, I'll be long gone. Will you? Holmes produces a small object from his pocket. The telegram form he persuaded the conductor to send before the lines went down. I took the liberty of informing the authorities that Cornelius Blackwood was last seen boarding this train, and should be detained for questioning upon its arrival at the next station. Every passenger will be carefully identified and documented, including, he adds with satisfaction, any crew members who cannot adequately explain their presence. Blackwood's confident expression wavers. You knew. Even before you searched the trunk, you knew. I suspected. The locked room was too perfect, too theatrical. Real crimes are messy, improvised things. This felt planned, which meant it was likely planned by the only person who truly benefited from Blackwood's disappearance. Blackwood. Himself, Holmes tilts his head slightly. Tell me, where is the real conductor? Cargo compartment 3 behind the mail sacks. Unconscious but unharmed. I'm not a murderer, Mr. Holmes. Merely a pragmatist. My business ventures failed. Bad luck, poor timing, circumstances beyond my control. But my creditors don't accept such explanations. They wanted their pound of flesh, and I chose not to provide it. Your creditors, Mrs. Ashford says, her voice shaking with rage, include widows and orphans, children whose fathers killed themselves rather than face the ruin you brought them, and you call yourself pragmatic. I call myself a survivor, Blackwood's voice hardens. The market is risk. Everyone knows that. I gambled and lost just as they did. The only difference is I had the foresight to prepare an escape route. And the arrogance to think you could outsmart everyone, Holmes adds. But arrogance is often the downfall of men who believe themselves cleverer than they are. You created an impossible mystery, Mr. Blackwood, but impossible mysteries invariably have solutions. You merely hoped no one would find yours before you escaped. Blackwood slumps slightly, the fight draining from him as the reality of his situation settles in. So what now? You hand me over to the authorities, I stand trial, face imprisonment. That, Holmes says quietly, is not my decision to make. I merely solve mysteries. What society does with the solutions is beyond my purview. He glances at Watson. Though I suspect Dr. Watson will ensure the real conductor is found and revived, and that Mr. Blackwood remains secured until the rescue crews arrive. Watson nods, already moving toward the door. The conductor, the real one, must be found and freed, and Blackwood must be prevented from any further attempts at escape. As Watson leaves, he hears Miss Hartley's voice, calm and professional. Mr. Blackwood, would you care to comment for the record on the allegations of fraud and— The door swings shut behind him, muffling the response. The corridor is dim and cold, but Watson barely notices. His mind is still processing the revelation, the elegant solution to an impossible problem. Sherlock Holmes has done it again, Watson thinks, with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. Solved the unsolvable, seen through the allusion to the truth beneath. Outside, the snow continues to fall, gentler now, as if the storm has spent its fury and found peace. By morning, the rescue crews will arrive. The train will be freed from its white prison, and Cornelius Blackwood will face the justice he sought to escape. But for now, in this frozen moment between crime and consequence, there is only the soft hiss of the heating pipes, the creak of the settling carriage, and the knowledge that even in a locked room, even in the heart of an impossible mystery, the truth finds a way to emerge. It always does. Morning arrives with unexpected gentleness, the sky clearing to reveal a pale winter sun that transforms the endless white landscape into something almost transcendent, a study in light and shadow where the drifts catch the low rays and glow, as if lit from within. The wind has died completely, leaving a stillness so profound that when the first distant sounds of the rescue crews reach the train, they seem to travel across the snow like ripples across still water. Watson stands at the window of their compartment, watching the figures emerge from the north, men with shovels and heavy equipment, their breath rising in white plumes, their voices calling to one another with the particular camaraderie of people engaged in difficult but necessary work. Behind them, barely visible through the morning haze, another train waits on the cleared section of track, ready to take the stranded passengers onward to their destinations, once the Northern Express can be freed from its frozen prison. Holmes sits at the small table, writing in his notebook with the methodical precision of someone creating a record for posterity. He has been at this since dawn, documenting every detail of the case while his memory remains fresh. The locked room, the disguise, the psychology of a man desperate enough to orchestrate his own impossible disappearance. Every so often he pauses, taps his pen against his teeth in thought, then continues writing. You're chronicling it, Watson observes. I'm ensuring accuracy. Your narratives, while admirably readable, Watson, sometimes sacrifice precision for drama. This case deserves a proper technical record. Holmes glances up, a slight smile softening the criticism. Though I trust you'll write your own version eventually, complete with atmospheric descriptions of the snow and lengthy passages about the human condition. Someone has to make our adventures comprehensible to ordinary readers. Not everyone thinks in pure logic. More's the pity. The world would be vastly more efficient if they did. A knock at the door interrupts them. Jenkins appears, looking significantly more composed than he did yesterday, though the strain of recent events still shows around his eyes. Begging your pardon, gentlemen, but the conductor, the real conductor, wanted me to inform you that we should be moving within the hour. They've nearly cleared the drift ahead. Thank you, Jenkins, Watson says. How is Mr. Blackwood this morning? Secured in an empty compartment under guard, sir. Quiet, mostly. I think the reality of his situation has settled in. Jenkins hesitates, then adds, I should have known, shouldn't I? Should have recognised that it wasn't him in the compartment at 1 o'clock. Some valet I am, fooled by a dummy made of pillows and wax. Holmes sets down his pen. You saw what you expected to see, which is what Blackwood counted on. The human mind is remarkably efficient at filling gaps in perception with assumption. Don't fault yourself for operating as evolution designed you to. Still, sir, 20 years of service, and I couldn't tell the difference between my employer and a pile of his old clothes. Jenkins shakes his head ruefully. What will happen to him? To Mr. Blackwood, I mean. That depends on the prosecutors and the courts, Watson says gently. But I suspect his cleverness in escaping will be considerably less impressive to a judge than his crimes in defrauding investors. After Jenkins departs, Watson returns to his vigil at the window. The rescue crews are closer now, working systematically to clear the tracks, their shovels biting into the packed snow with rhythmic efficiency. It's honest work, Watson thinks, and honest workers, the kind of men who simply do what needs doing without elaborate schemes or impossible vanishings. You're brooding, Holmes observes without looking up from his notebook. I'm reflecting. There's a difference. Is there? Both involve excessive contemplation of matters already concluded. The case is solved, Watson. Blackwood's fate is no longer our concern, isn't it? We uncovered his fraud, exposed his escape attempt. We're complicit in whatever happens to him now. Holmes finally sets down his pen entirely, giving Watson his full attention. We're complicit only in revealing the truth. What society chooses to do with that truth, whether to prosecute, to punish, to rehabilitate, that is beyond our remit. I solve mysteries. I do not administer justice. You don't think they're connected, truth and justice? I think they're related but distinct. Truth is objective, discoverable through reason and observation. Justice is subjective, shaped by laws and morality and the particular prejudices of one's culture and era. I can determine what happened in a locked room, but I cannot determine what punishment, if any, fits that happening. Watson considers this. You're more comfortable with the puzzle than the consequences. Infinitely more comfortable. Puzzles have solutions. Consequences simply ripple outward endlessly, affecting lives in ways impossible to predict or control. Holmes stands, stretching his long frame. Besides, Blackwood made his choices knowing the risks. He gambled on escape and lost. That's not tragedy, Watson. That's simply mathematics. Before Watson can respond, the train shudders slightly. The first movement in nearly 36 hours. The sound of metal on metal rings through the carriage as the wheels test their grip on the rails, and slowly, incrementally, the Northern Express begins to creep forward. The drifts fall away behind them, and the rescue crews wave as they pass, their job completed, their part in this small drama concluded. The dining car has been opened for a late breakfast, and the passengers gather there less from hunger than from a shared desire for companionship after the isolation of the night. Mrs. Ashford sits with Miss Hartley, the two women engaged in quiet conversation, an alliance, Watson suspects, born of shared grievance against Blackwood. The journalist is still taking notes, but more casually now, as if the urgency of the story has given way to the slower work of understanding its implications. Reverend Pemberton sits alone at a corner table, his earlier joviality completely abandoned. He looks older somehow, diminished by the revelation of his sister's losses and his own helplessness to address them. When Watson catches his eye, the Reverend offers a weak smile that doesn't quite reach his face, let alone his eyes. The real conductor, a man named Whitmore, who spent the night unconscious in a cargo compartment and woke to a headache and the bizarre news that he'd been impersonated, moves through the car with careful efficiency, checking on passengers and rebuilding his authority one small interaction at a time. He pauses at Holmes's table. "Mr. Holmes, I wanted to thank you properly. If you hadn't uncovered Blackwood's scheme, he might well have escaped in the confusion of our arrival. The railway company is deeply grateful." Holmes waves this away. "I merely applied logic to available evidence. Any competent investigator would have reached the same conclusion." "I doubt that, sir. Most investigators would still be pondering the locked room while Blackwood strolled away in a stolen uniform." Whitmore hesitates, then adds, "Will you be writing this up? For the newspapers, I mean." "I leave such matters to Dr. Watson, who has a talent for making the methodical work of deduction sound like adventure, though I suspect Miss Hartley will publish her account long before Watson gets around to his." As if summoned by her name, Miss Hartley appears at their table. "May I join you for a moment?" Holmes gestures to the empty seat. "By all means. Come to gather final quotes for your article? Actually, I came to ask your permission to use your name in my account. The London Reformer would very much like to run the story, but I want to ensure it's accurate and respectful of your involvement. You may use my name as you see fit, Miss Hartley. The truth is a public good, and your readers deserve to know how Cornelius Blackwood defrauded his investors and attempted to escape justice. Though I would ask one small favour, which is, emphasise the victims in your narrative. Mrs. Ashford's husband, Reverend Pemberton's sister and her family, all the others who lost everything through Blackwood's schemes. They are the story, not my deductions. The locked room is merely a footnote to their suffering." Miss Hartley studies him for a moment, then nods slowly. "I'll make them the centre of the piece. You have my word." After she leaves, Watson leans forward. "That was unexpectedly compassionate of you." "Was it? I thought it was simply logical. A story about a clever escape is entertaining but ultimately trivial. A story about systematic fraud and its human cost might actually prevent future victims from falling into similar traps. One serves the public interest, the other merely serves vanity." The train picks up speed gradually, finding its rhythm again after the long stillness. Through the windows, the landscape begins to change as they leave the exposed moorland behind and enter more sheltered country. Valleys with stone walls, clusters of bare trees, the first signs of human habitation after the empty white expanse. A village appears in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, and Watson feels an unexpected surge of relief at this evidence of ordinary life continuing regardless of mysteries and disappearances and men who try to vanish from locked rooms. By midday they reach the next station, a modest platform in a market town whose name Watson doesn't catch in the confusion of arrival. Police constables are waiting, alerted by Holmes's telegram, and Blackwood is removed from the train with surprising efficiency. He goes quietly without drama, looking more weary than defiant. As the constables lead him across the platform, Mrs. Ashford watches from the dining car window, her expression unreadable. "Do you think she feels vindicated?" Watson asks quietly. Holmes follows his gaze. "I think she feels nothing, Watson, because nothing can bring back her husband or undo the damage Blackwood caused. Vindication is cold comfort to those who've lost everything." The train remains at the station for nearly an hour while railway officials sort out schedules and connections and apologise profusely to delayed passengers. Most accept these apologies with British stoicism, already composing the stories they'll tell at Christmas dinners about the time they were snowbound with a vanishing industrialist and Sherlock Holmes. Jenkins approaches them on the platform, a travelling case in hand. "Begging your pardon, gentlemen, but I wanted to say goodbye properly, and to thank you for solving it. I know that sounds strange, but not knowing would have been worse somehow." "What will you do now?" Watson asks. "Without an employer?" "I've had an offer, actually. Mrs. Ashford's household manager is retiring, and she's asked if I'd consider the position. Says she could use someone who understands discretion and loyalty." He smiles faintly. "Ironic, given how thoroughly Mr. Blackwood fooled me, but I'm grateful for the opportunity." After he departs, Holmes lights his pipe, finally after 2 days of abstaining in the close quarters of the train, and exhales a stream of smoke that the winter wind catches and disperses. And so the circle completes. Blackwood's valet becomes Mrs. Ashford's butler. Victim and enabler find common ground in their shared experience of his fraud. You sound almost poetic. The smoke does that sometimes. clears the mind but clouds the expression. He taps out the pipe against the platform railing. Shall we board? I believe we still have a Christmas dinner to attend, and your Scottish relatives will never forgive us if we're late. The new train, the relief service organised by the railway to complete the Northern Express's interrupted journey, is less luxurious but faster, and it carries them north through the afternoon and into the evening. The landscape grows progressively more rugged, the hills steeper, the valleys deeper. Snow still covers everything, but it's older snow now, settled and serene rather than the wild accumulation of the blizzard. Holmes returns to his notebook, adding final details and observations. Watson watches the countryside pass and thinks about locked rooms and impossible disappearances and men who believe themselves clever enough to escape consequence. He thinks about Mrs. Ashford reading her mineralogy text while her husband's destroyer sat 3 tables away, about Miss Hartley building her case one observation at a time, about Jenkins serving brandy to a dummy and never knowing the difference. And he thinks about Holmes, whose gift is not merely solving mysteries but understanding why they exist in the first place. What desperation or greed or fear drives people to construct elaborate deceptions and impossible scenarios? Holmes, he says, as Edinburgh's lights begin to appear on the horizon, do you ever wonder what it would be like? To be ordinary, I mean. To take a train journey that's simply a train journey, without vanishing passengers or locked room mysteries. Holmes looks up from his notebook, considering the question seriously. I imagine it would be rather like being blind, Watson. Peaceful, perhaps, but profoundly limited. I see patterns because I cannot help but see them. To shut that off would be to shut off a fundamental part of my cognition. He pauses. Though I confess, a quiet holiday would not be entirely unwelcome. Do your Scottish relatives have any unsolved murders or missing heirlooms I should know about? Watson laughs. Not that I'm aware of, though knowing our luck, we'll arrive to find the Christmas pudding has mysteriously vanished and accusations flying. Then I shall have to occupy myself with the crossword puzzles and excessive consumption of brandy, like any respectable holiday guest. The train pulls into Edinburgh's Waverley Station just after 8 in the evening, 2 days late but ultimately triumphant in completing its journey. The platform is crowded with families reuniting, luggage being redistributed, the organised chaos of arrival. Holmes and Watson gather their belongings and step down onto Scottish soil, the air crisp and cold, and carrying the scent of coal smoke and brewing hops and the indefinable quality that marks the approach of Christmas. As they make their way toward the station exit, Watson glances back at the train one final time. The Northern Express, or what remains of its interrupted journey, and sits at the platform already being prepared for its return south. Ordinary passengers board with ordinary destinations, unaware that just days ago, within those same corridors and compartments, an impossible mystery unfolded and was solved. Do you think Blackwood regrets it? Watson asks suddenly. The whole elaborate scheme? Holmes adjusts his scarf against the Edinburgh wind. I think Blackwood regrets getting caught, which is not quite the same thing. But regret, like justice, is subjective. What matters is that the truth emerged, the innocent were vindicated, and a man who built his fortune on the suffering of others will face accounting for his actions. And we can enjoy our Christmas in peace. Precisely, though I give it even odds that your Aunt Margaret will have some fascinating mystery involving the church silver or a disputed inheritance. They step out into the Edinburgh night, into the gaslit streets, and the promise of hot dinners and warm firesides and all the ordinary comforts of an extraordinary season. Behind them, the station continues its eternal rhythm of arrivals and departures, of journeys ending and beginning, of all the small human dramas that play out in the space between destinations. The snow has stopped falling, the tracks are clear, and the mystery of the Snowbound Express has passed into history, one more impossible problem solved by Sherlock Holmes's relentless application of reason to the unreasonable. Tomorrow there will be new mysteries, new puzzles, new locked rooms to open. But tonight there is only the gentle fall of snow on Edinburgh's ancient stones, the warmth of friendship and the peaceful knowledge that even in the coldest winter, truth finds a way to shine through. The train whistle sounds one final time as they walk away into the Christmas night. And somewhere in the distance, church bells begin to ring, welcoming the season and all who travel through it, whether by rail or by reason, toward home.